Hey there, and welcome. So, Side Effects is holding a new Houdini art challenge called Mardini, which is starting on the 1st of March. The idea of it is to create an artwork in Houdini based on a daily prompt. That prompt is basically just a theme to base your artwork around. It's open to anyone who would like to enter, and if you do enter, it doesn't have to be every day. Last year, there were prizes for Best Daily, Best Weekly, Best Collection, Best Overall Artwork, and for entering every day. So, as you may know, I won Best Collection in last year's Who Lie Art Challenge, and I've decided to do a daily review video for each day's entries. I'm going to be talking about the winning entries, what makes them so good, and then I'm also going to be talking about some of the other entries. I'll go over what I like about them, what I think could maybe be changed, and how they could have been winning entries in my opinion. So if you'd like me to review your entry, feel free to tag me on Instagram at 9_between. So with all of that comes a bit of a disclaimer. Everything that I'm saying here is my own opinion. It doesn't make it right or wrong. I'm just trying to give a critique that the artist can work from and hopefully something that you can learn from as well. I'm not trying to make fun of or insult or belittle any of the artists. I'm merely just trying to give some feedback in an entertaining way. So let's get straight into it. In third place in the images category, we have this entry by Disturber for day 15 medieval. And they've gone for this sort of alleyway, cobblestone walkway with these buildings lining the sides of the street. And the main element of this sort of scene is really the texturing. So compositionally, it's a closed off composition. You can see that you're sort of in the center of the street. You're not looking down upon it. You're not seeing the whole city. You're in the street and you're seeing the walkway. So it's almost a point of view shot. The other thing about the composition is that it leads your eye down this alleyway because of the shape of the buildings. And so that actually adds a level of dynamism to the shot because there feels to be a natural sense of movement this way. As for texturing, they've done a great job. You can see that they have all of these various types of stones or brickwork, and each one is textured and has displacement. They also have these vines that look great. There's nothing wrong with these vines as far as I can tell. There's some very good variation on all of them, and it just adds that little touch. You know, if you didn't have that, it might feel a bit empty and a bit sparse because it would just be a lot of gray. So this bit of color really helps break the image. And then they have this lighting. So this light that hits the top of the rooftops, but also hits all of these buildings over here. That's a very nice touch to have the light sort of spread out across these archways. So yeah, wonderful entry by Disturber. That was the third place entry. In second place, we have this entry by Takuya Okada. And what they've gone for is a high level of detail through texturing. So they have very basic geometry. This helmet isn't anything particularly difficult to model. You would sort of cut these areas out with a boolean, and these areas over here you could raise up with a displacer along normals, or even by creating two poly wires and sort of insetting them into the geometry. So the actual detail on this is great. So they have first the base level of detail, which is sort of these scratches on the helmet, the metallic finish, and the bit of dirt and grunge all over. And then they have this upper layer, which is the blood. So the blood lies on top of all of the scratches and metallics. And overall, it just looks good, right? They have great lighting where the light hits this area over here. They've got the more blue lighting over here. And when it comes to metallics, it's important to have variation in your lighting. Because they pick up so much of the light and they're rarely affected by the light, you need variation in lighting to create variation in your metallics. So that's a nice touch. They've also made sure to put this into an environment and not leave it just lying in a void. They've sort of added this displacement on the ground, the cobblestone walkway, and this really helps set the scene as a medieval setting. So they've done a great job with this one. It's an awesome still, lovely level of detail. I think it's great. So yeah, awesome work from Takuya Okada. And in first place, we have this entry from Nico Klein. This entry has a lot of charm. There's a good whimsical element to it. It's quite fun. Their take on medieval was to go for a castle, as you can see. And what they've done here is a very good compositional choice. They've used empty space very well. So they have this central piece of terrain. And this makes the scene secluded, right? This is a single piece holding up this castle. So that's a separate part to everything else. They have this background piece of geometry, but it's out of focus, right? So that helps you understand that this is closer than that over there. They're not sort of in line. Then they have all of this empty sky. So they've made sure to include lots of empty space over here. Once again, that makes this feel very isolated, right? This castle feels isolated. And then they have the single bridge. So this bridge over here to sort of link up the composition. Compositionally, this is excellent. They've also followed the topic very well. The one thing that I might change is a bit of the texturing. Some of these textures feel slightly off. And there's a lot of reused textures. So this over here looks the same as this over here. I might be mistaken. And it's the same as this over here. So I think if there was some variation in the texturing, it would be great, even if they just use some sort of noise pattern. Other than that, I think a little bit of shrubbery or foliage on the cliff face would be awesome. But once again, it's a daily entry, and sometimes those things just aren't possible. They did a great job with the detail in the castle. It's got a good shape to it. The bridge looks great. And yeah, you know, you get the idea across. This does have a good feel to it, and it feels like something out of a fairy tale. So I think that this is awesome. Great work from Nico Klein once again. In third place in the animation category, we have this entry by Carl Drifter. So that's a pretty awesome shot. The amount that they got done in this time is incredible. So they have all of these different weapons, and you can see that each one is different. I imagine that there's a level of proceduralism because this one does look the same as that one over there. That one looks the same as that one. So I do think they maybe reused the setups in some way, but in a procedural manner. They've got this insane structure in the background where there's this pattern on the walls and arches, and the back wall has a different pattern to add some detail. They have this carpeting up front, which sets the scene very nicely. This feels like a museum. And then they have the camera move along here. So one thing about the camera move that I'm noticing is that it helps to catch the detail on the glass of all these display cabinets. There's a little bit of grunge and sort of scratching on there, and the light catches on there as you move along. So that's a very nice touch. Another thing is you can actually see that the background is pretty well fleshed out. Even over there, there's no real empty space. It is filled by this wall. So then you come in close over here and you see the center point. So that builds interest because as you're coming in, the interest is mounting. Once you get here, I find it quite interesting that this crown gets brighter. So it might not be noticeable, but over here, the actual brightness of the crown increases. Now, I'm not sure how he did that. It might have been in post, but I think it's a nice touch to really add to the impact of the crown, right? And so everything about this is great. You know, there's a great level of detail. I think this is awesome. It's very impressive how he got this done in such a short period of time. So yeah, great work from Carl Drifter. In second place, we have this entry by Destroyer. Now, this is a very light and whimsical entry, right? They have these trees that are scattered all over here and the castle in the background. However, it seems almost miniature, and I don't know if that was their intention. If it is, they did a great job of making it look like a miniature because of things like shallow depth of field. When you do shallow depth of field, it makes things look smaller than they actually are. All of that makes it look like a bit of a miniature. A couple of things that I love about this. Firstly, they have a great level of variation. They have these rocks all over their environment that are scattered about. Their terrain is not too uniform. They have good shape to it, right? There's elements where it dips and elements where it rises. They also have varying trees. These trees are smaller than, say, these ones over here. This one is tilted that way, while this one's tilted this way. So it may be the same geometry, I actually can't tell, but each one is sort of oriented differently and has different scaling. And so they have a great level of variation. They also have these patches of green, there's a little bit of grass. All of that really helps to fill out the scene. As for the actual castle, they have great texturing on it. They have some displacement or bump over there. And they also have these vellum flags. Now, it's very easy to do one simulation and just duplicate it over, but it doesn't seem to be what they did because they're running at different times. Once again, they also have a very basic camera move just to add some dynamism to the shot. So everything about this is great. A lovely little scene, and it has some charm to it. So a great entry from Destroyer. And in first place, we have this entry from J. Santisculta. and they have this almost 300 inspired shot. So first and foremost, great artistic choice. The choice to use just black and white with no lighting, no shadows, no texturing, it's a smart move because firstly, it makes it memorable. There hasn't been a single entry in the competition thus far, or as far as I've seen, that does an art style like this, right? So it makes it memorable. It also reduces the amount of work that you have to do. You don't have to focus on texturing. You can just focus on composition. Finally, the other thing that this does is it draws your attention to movement, right? And story. It doesn't take away by adding unnecessary focus to objects that aren't important. It really just focuses on movement and composition. So a couple of great things about this, they have all of this detail in the foreground, right? All of this over here. And you don't know what this is. This might be, fallen comrades and a shield of some sort, maybe a spear, some flags, whatever it is, it adds detail to the foreground. And the shot would be potentially boring without it, right? You're once again establishing a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. As for the character, I like that there's already these arrows stuck in him. It makes him feel like the tragic hero or something, right? You can get a bit more of a story going from that. I like the pose that he starts in, but I slightly disagree with the movement that he has. The animation over here, I think it's a bit too subtle and a bit too slow. It could maybe be improved with a bit of flair, some dramatics, where he throws his arms back, in a sort of dying breath type of thing. As for camera move, I think that's another element that could be added to this. I think a slight pan up to follow the arrows and then a pan back down. Very subtle, not too much, and I think that would help it a bit. Other than those two things, I think that this is awesome. They've got a great idea going here, and their artistic approach is awesome. So yeah, Jay Santi Skultan, love your entry. My man. This entry from Tomotaka is so cool. I just wish it was a little bit more dramatic. So they could have gone for the more risky thing where they put a black background and then they hit this with very hard edge lighting. So it just catches all of these edges over here because the shape is very interesting. And this is a very menacing figure. The plague doctor type thing. And so other than that, I think that they should focus more on texturing because this is a still. Texturing is very important. Your eye doesn't have to focus on motion, so it can focus on minor details. So the minutia of this, there needs to be some sort of material, some sort of like cross weave or something on the actual fabric, and then slight variation in the colors between these things. So this mask is the same material as this, and this is the same material as the hat, as far as I can tell. But everything else about this is excellent. Like, they have the setup here. They just need to work on lighting and a little bit of their texturing. And then I think it's a top 3 entry because they have this offset sort of image like this. They have this stick. And all of this is very interesting, right? Compositionally, it looks great. Even the actual geometry looks awesome. So yeah, nothing bad with this except for the lighting and texturing. I think those are 2 areas where it could improve and it would be perfect. There's another plague doctor. And similar thing, once again, like geometry is not bad. I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with it. I think texturing is where it's being let down. So there should be some sort of, fabric material. Once again, we see the cross weave. And then lighting, again, I think it should have harsher edge light. This sort of shot would do well with edge light. Although I guess in this case, it is more of that muted tone. I do like that there is variation in the color in the background. But yeah, I think texturing in this case is important. Jay Reichman, sorry guys, I'm fairly sick, so I don't have the energy of finishing the last pieces. Yeah, hope you get better soon. Everyone, send positive vibes that way. Hey, let's go! 'Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. So this one over here, crazy level of detail, but once again, just kind of being lit down by texturing and lighting. Maybe I should do a little thing at the end of this video about lighting. I think it could be cool. So yeah, I'll have a mini tutorial at the end about lighting, because this is something that a lot of people seem to be having some issues with. Okay, so 2 things that I immediately noticed is this over here needs displacement, definitely. It just looks off if it doesn't, right? This just looks like a carpet or something. I think this composition can work. I think this needs to be textured better. So does this over here, and this over here needs to have a more distinct texture to it. But even if you don't do that, then definitely lighting. So all of those in the background should definitely be darker. And then you have a brighter light sort of hitting the front over here. I'd also maybe lift up the camera a bit, so there's slightly less ground and a bit more of the interesting stuff. So maybe just to the top of this, because wait, is this the Houdini logo? Because if this is the Houdini logo, then I definitely think that this focal point over here should be, well, you know, the focal point. So you should come up with your camera a bit and zoom out so the whole thing is in the shot. And then, yeah, I think that would be some major improvement to this. But in terms of geometry, that's a lot of good geometry in a very short time. So awesome stuff on your geometry. That's Capicom. So this one by Jason Harmon. Once again, I'm going to say, you know, what I usually say. Lighting is very much important. Edge light hitting here would be nice, especially when you have a completely black background. That's actually something that I haven't mentioned. Generally, if you want the very black, like completely black background, you need to hit it with a sort of edge light on your actual geometry or your focal point, because you just need that contrast between, you know, the foreground and the background. The issue with doing everything sort of the same shade is that you don't really know where to focus, right? The eye naturally likes areas of focus, points of interest. So any sort of bright areas the eye will tend towards. When it's a whole picture like this, you kind of lose the detail, because there's so much good detail in this, but the eye just doesn't know where to, you know, rest initially. So yeah, I think just a focal point on this, little bit of a lighting adjustment would be awesome. Awesome geometry from Aslax KS. Awesome entry. Like I love the geometry that they came up with, and the composition looks good. Obviously, it's not a fully fleshed out scene. Yeah, it's missing all of those things to make it feel like it's part of an environment, the sort of terrain and volumetrics, all of those things, but I think it's awesome. Ayub Ha, he did a great job with this Lego set. I think, once again, I keep saying the same thing. I'm sorry, I wish I had other advice, but really lighting is so important. This front face needs more light, right? With the light as it is, it's just sort of coming in this side and hitting the back. And so you're not really getting any detail of the front. And this is your focal point once again. So a couple of things that I might recommend in this case. One is to bring your camera sort of down and around. So it's facing the castle from sort of here, and sort of looking down the castle. Still like fit the whole thing into the frame and then have these pieces on the ground. But I think viewing it from above like this maybe takes away from it, but I think that's minor. I think the main thing is just get some lighting on your focal point, this front area. Oh, they even have a moat. That's so cool. I didn't notice. Yeah, that moat is nice. And all of these little flowers or whatever that is. Cool touches. That's from Ayub Ha. Superior siege weapon. Facts. Ooh, that's nice. I think a shot like this could just do with some like volumetrics. A little bit of dust particles in the air, grunge it up a bit. But I think that this sort of focal point is cool. So in this case, I feel like they got their lighting pretty good. The only issue is maybe some volumetrics, a little bit more interest to the shot. Yeah, that's from Joe NYC. Super cool entry from Stephen Kang. Stephen Kang. And this is kind of what I was talking about, right? Where you need to have your lighting sort of focusing on this. And maybe you can imagine this if the lighting was uniform. So say this sort of lighting, right? This over here, just extrapolate it. The whole thing looks like that. Then it's really boring, right? That's the issue. Like if this sort of lighting is everywhere, you don't get the really interesting like dips in color and lighting and these like bright areas over here. And so I think that this is a good example of lighting done right. The reason I think that this one might not have one, basically because of its simplicity. So it's very good, like it's excellent. But I know that when they're choosing winners, they sort of reward creativity and complexity. And so although this looks excellent, I think that it would need to go a little bit further to be a winning entry. So I think a bit of a LUT on this, I'd say lookup table, basically just remapping certain color ranges. So it might remap pitch black to very, very dark brown. It might remap highlights to something like a very light pink or something. And so that basically just tints the entire image in a very interesting way. And you can make it look maybe a bit more old by doing that. I'd also think that in this case, lots of little particulate matter in the air would be important because you are going for a still. And this does need a bit more detail than you usually would. I do believe that Stephen Kang is extremely talented. So I say all of this not as something that he doesn't know. I'm pretty sure he knows all of this. I'm just saying this because I think it might be interesting for anyone who might not know. I also think maybe some volumetrics in the air and things make this a bit more dusty. So he's gone for a very modern look, but I think that this modernist look maybe doesn't fit with the topic as well as if he had done this in a medieval style, so very brown and grungy. Yeah, it's just my opinion though, so I don't know. Crazy amount of detail in this from GC Pigeon. Looks awesome. Yeah, I don't really know how to fault this one at all. I think it does look very good. Maybe lighting again. Maybe do a sort of evening lighting. So have like blue in the shadows and a very orange tone. And then maybe sort of have that cutting across. So there's some areas in shadow, some areas in light. Yeah, I think once again, just add some interest with lighting because you do have a lot of good detail in your geometry. This looks awesome. This is really nice. So I'd say because you're doing slow motion and you have great detail and everything already, it's so tricky because sometimes I say these things and in one case it applies and in another it doesn't. Like in this case, I think a black background would look pretty cool. And then you do shallow depth of field on this and then maybe even come in a bit closer. So like you're super close to it initially or something, or it's coming towards the camera. Either one could be really cool. I just think that compositionally and I think compositionally this is maybe where this one falls a bit short, but I think it's so cool. The sort of slow motion swinging. I think that this just needs a slight change to the environment and a slightly better composition. So is there a camera move here? I can't tell. I think there is. It's a very slight camera move. Maybe focus on this a bit more. So something that's kind of interesting actually. There's a thing, what is it called? Contrast ratio or something, where the foreground needs to be a couple of stops different to the background. And in this case, I think they're almost the same, like contrast level. So one needs to be brightened or darkened. So if you darken this, it becomes a silhouette. If you brighten this, it becomes a something that I can't remember the name of. But yeah, so you have that where you increase the stop on this or decrease the stop on that. Stop is just like the brightness, basically. That's pretty awesome. So a couple of things that I really like about this: camera move, dynamics, and the concept. And the little bit of movement in the shield's also really cool. I think the issue with this one is just kind of render quality and focal point again. It's like it looks really good, but you don't really know where to focus. It's such a weird thing, man. I struggle to explain this every time because shots like this, where you're sort of zoomed out, they're impressive in their dynamism. But say this was in film, you would generally cut to a single soldier or something, right, with his shield. Or you would come in close and show the arrow sort of hitting the shield. But you don't get the opportunity to do that because obviously there's not enough time, so it's just this shot. And these shots are almost like filler shots. Maybe I'm being a bit too sort of conceptual and just kind of talking about film where I really should be talking about a daily entry, but I do think that it applies in this case, where this would be a filler shot in a movie. It wouldn't be a main shot, right? So yeah, it's tricky. It is tricky, but conceptually and with dynamics, animation, camera move, all very cool. It just sort of lacks a focal point. Medieval catapult. Looks so good. That's a nice simulation, good slow-mo. That's a bit weird that it lingers, but yeah, you know. I think this is cool. The one guy who wouldn't approve is the trebuchet guy from earlier, but I think that this is a cool catapult. Oh boy, here we go again. 3 hairs. What is that? A meme appearing in sacred sites. 3 hairs chasing each other in a circle. Each ear is shared by 2 hairs, so that only 3 ears are shown. That's cool. Oh, Dolores. Oh, that's cool. Aha. It's a pretty accurate historical depiction of like medieval times. People dancing and on fire. Just add some plague in here and like you can throw out every other history book. Looks so good. Oh, yeet. Gets hectic. That's cool. Clamo. Oh, wait, I'm at the end already? Ah. Well, I guess that's it for this video. Wait, no, it's not. I have to do the light thing. Yeah, so let's go do the light thing. Right, so I'm just gonna drop a geonode. I'm gonna set up some basic geometry just to give you the idea of what we're doing here. So I'm just gonna drop a sphere in here. Polygon mesh. Let's increase rows, columns, make it smoother. Oh, I'll also do a UV auto, labs auto UV, that one. Just so I have some UVs in case I add a texture onto this. So then I can drop another geonode. This will be our sphere over here. This will be a background. So I'm going to start with some basic lighting concepts. Just going to drop a grid. So this grid, we can move to the back once again, this is our background. So I'm just going to angle that 90, make this 15 by 15 or so. And now I can move to the front. Maybe I'll make this even bigger, do it like 30 by 30, just so I have enough space to work with. Once again, I'll do an auto UV on this. Okay, now I'm just going to make a basic texture. So I'm going to be using Redshift, but the concepts apply no matter what you're using. So over here, just an RS matte builder. Sorry, that one always gets me. So then I'll just call this, I don't know, basic matte. And in here, I think I'll grab a texture. So let's do an RS texture sampler, and I'll grab something. Okay, so I got this plaster. I'll just plug it into the diffuse color. I'll also plug it into displacement. So I'll drop a RS displacement, plug that into here, texture map out into displacement, and change this to about 0.05. Then I'm going to drop a camera. So just towards the front, just a very simple camera. So super simple so far, right? And if I go into the sort of render view, and I'll bring it up on the second monitor, so just open render view and just throw it over this side, bring it up. Okay, all right, so I haven't applied any textures or anything yet. So now I take this texture, basic matte, onto there and onto there. Doesn't look like it's got the texture. Oh, the other thing is I'll have to activate Redshift displacement. So just over here, displacement. Actually, I might not even need displacement for this. You know what? I'm going to not do displacement on these. I'll just do bump. Bump is simpler and it does the same thing really for what I want here. So RS bump map. The difference between bump and displacement generally is that bump doesn't actually change the geometry, right? It's just changing normals pretty much. So over here, I'll just do 0.01, maybe a bit higher, 0.5, 0.75. Yeah, okay, that looks fine. Really not going to focus too much on this. So we have what is the default light, right? It's a light from the front that they just put so you can see what's going on in your scene. Now, when you're lighting, in real life, lights are there so you can see things, right? I think we all understand that. Lights are just so you can see. However, when you're making an artwork, lights play a very different role. Lights draw attention. Lights bring things into focus. Lights are what direct your view. There's a couple of other things that direct your view, such as shallow depth of field, composition, a sort of curvature in a shot leads your eye along the curve. All of those sorts of things, they are other concepts, but lighting is the main one, right? Lighting defines where your eye is. And I can prove this to you. If I just drop a light dome over here, super basic light dome, nothing special, just like this, right? Everything's the same color. So where's the focus at the moment? I mean, if you take a look over here, this over here is our sphere and this is the background. They look exactly the same. Now, I'm going to remove this light dome because I want to give you the idea of what different lights do first. Okay, so there's a couple of different types of lighting. Generally, you start with what's known as a full light, right? Or you can start with the key light, but it's up for debate here. And this is sort of a photography concept, and this is mainly for portraiture. But the important thing about portraiture is actually that most of the time, your shots are going to follow very similar rules to portraiture because you have a sort of central focal point, right? And that's what you have with portraits. You have a single focal point. You're trying to draw as much attention to it as possible. Obviously, depending on the style, but we'll get into that a bit later. So a full light is generally from sort of the direction of the camera. The idea of the full light is to just give ambient light so you can actually see the subject. So I'm going to drop a just basic light. So this is an area light, and I'm just going to kind of position it behind the camera, right? Something like this. And if I take a look at this light, you can see that it's not really doing much. Oh, and also this is extremely reflective. Let me just change that real quickly. Okay, yeah, this just puts a very basic light, right? And this light is generally not too hectic. It's more of an ambient light. It's just sort of setting you up just so that you have something. So that's your full light, right? The next light that you'll generally add is what's known as a key light. So a key light, you generally, I'd say it's probably about 45 degrees from the camera, usually. Obviously, that isn't like a hard and fast rule. If you have very dramatic lighting, then it's more of like 90 degrees, and that can be in any direction, right? It can be left, right, up, down, wherever. So I'm just going to go about 45 degrees left. for my key light, and just drop a light over here. So now I have a key light, and this one is generally brighter than the full light. It's also more focused. So you'll notice that this is kind of everywhere at the moment, but a full light is more focused towards the actual sort of focal point. So I'll decrease the area size on this, maybe even decrease the spread. So this is a bit different in Mantra, but not too much. So maybe that's okay, and then drop exposure a bit. Right, so something like that. That's your key light. And I'm just going to change it a bit because I don't like the shadow that it's casting on the background. Remember, no hard and fast rules. 45 degrees is where I would say you can start sort of trying to position it from, but really there's no real rule to it. I'm just going to find a place that I like. Maybe something like that. I think it's kind of cool having that light also touch the back there. Okay, so now you have your key light, right? So I'm just going to change these names. This is full. Actually, I'll call him full. And this is your key light. Key. So you have your full and you have your key. The next one that you generally add, and this once again is for portraiture. And as I said, this is sort of used for most shots. So then you have what's known as a rim light. And this one, you kind of want to position about 45 degrees behind the subject. Maybe a bit less, I'd say maybe 30 or so. Once again, not a hard and fast rule. This one is very bright and hits just the edge. That gives you some edge detail. So I'm going to put one right over here. Switch on this render, see how this looks. Okay, so this one is going to be rim. And over here, I'm just going to increase the exposure on it until it's very bright so I can see what I'm working with. Once again, this is a very focused light, so I'm going to decrease the spread quite a bit, decrease the exposure a little. And okay, so now let's make a few changes. I don't want this to be visible because it might come into the view of the camera. So now I'm going to change its position. Just sort of want to hit the back of this, just the edge, angle it up a bit, something kind of like that. Okay, then generally the last light that you want is the background light. So this is just something to sort of give the background a bit of depth. So what you have here is a good setup, right? And you have the full light that allows you to see all of this over here. You have, and I'm just going to put F for full, and then this over here is your key light, right? And then this over here, that's your rim light. So now you can see that all of these lights play a very important role in providing contrast between the subject and the background. Now, this dark edge over here, maybe you want it, maybe you don't, but either way, it's good contrast, right? You're very much separating this from the background. If you just think back a little bit, when we just had that very uniform flat lighting, nothing was in focus. Now we can clearly see that the sphere is a focal point, right? It's got all these sorts of details added to it, but it's all added with lighting. And another thing to remember is that this is the same material as the background. So the only differentiating factor with this is the lighting. So this gives you an idea of how important lighting is. Even in a scene where everything is the same material, lighting is what separates it. So as I was saying, we add a background light next. This is just a bit of a light on the background. That's all there really is to it. Add a light over here and check this render out. Yeah, so you can control this. I'm just going to call this background. And over here, maybe play around with exposure a bit. Something like that. That's not bad. And you can go in a bit closer with it. It's also quite nice to have it as a very sort of shaped light. So oftentimes you'll see it kind of above like this, where it creates this sort of shape. But other times they might do it sort of angled from where your key light and rim light are. So like this, right? So now it looks like it's all the same light source. And it's not actually, but it looks like it is. So that's another thing that you can do. They also sometimes narrow it. So once again, you decrease the spread. It's more of a focused light like that, right? So like this, it almost appears as if this background light is what's causing your rim light. And that's just trickery. That's not actually what's causing it, but it looks like it. So yeah, that's another thing that you can do. Now, more interest that you can add to your lighting setup. So this is a very dramatic lighting setup so far. But some other things that you can add is a slight color tint. So what I would say is full over here, Dr. Full, is oftentimes a more blue ambient light. So we go a little bit blue on this, right? Adds a lot of interest to this, makes it a bit moody. Then I would say key light, you want in a sort of warmer tone, something around there. And then room light you can leave as just white, but you can also go with like a more yellowish tone or orangish tone. And you can split tone an image like this. Let's do background as a little bit of an orange light, right? So now you can see there's a lot of interest, and it's not coming from geometry or texturing or materials, any of that stuff. It's literally just from lighting. So that's one way of doing it, right? Where you have your full light, your key light, your room light, and a background light. Super basic, right? You're just ensuring that there's a good variation across the surface. You're also ensuring that there's maybe a bit of color variation. So, you know, this doesn't look bad. Of course, you'd probably want to change a bunch of things, different materials and stuff, of course. So all of these, I'm just going to switch off and hide because I want to show you another way of setting up your lighting. So that was a very dramatic lighting, right? But maybe you don't want such dramatic lighting. Maybe you want it to feel more natural. So for natural light, I would say use an HDRI. It's the easiest way to get natural lighting. So I'm just going to call this one environment, so ENV, and I'll choose an HDRI. If you want free HDRIs, go to hdrihaven.com. It's actually a South African guy, so you know, I support him all the way, my man. He's got great HDRIs for free. You can just support him on Patreon or whatever you'd like. But yeah, I always tell people to go there because he's got awesome stuff. I get most of mine there for free. They're nice. So let's see. So I'm just going to go Greenwich Park, right? Not sure how this one will look. Let's take a look. Okay, so it's a fairly blue ambient light, right? This is better than a full light because it's sort of adding more than what a full light would add. It's even sort of got a direction. There's a bit of green being cast on this because I believe like the bottom of this is a like grass or something. So let's also just change this to something else. Grape here, right? Very sort of uniform, soft lighting. Then maybe let's try another one, roof garden. This one's a little bit more lifted. It's got some more light to it. Studio, high contrast. So drop the exposure on this. Sort of dramatic. It's sort of accomplishing what you did with all of those lights. Let's try a different one. So now you can see like an HDRI does a lot of the work for you, right? So this one's got a lot of good color to it. Okay, so I might just use this one, right? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, the important thing when working with an HDRI is that this is fine, but you generally want to support one of the light sources. So an HDRI has multiple sort of light sources to it. You can see that there's this sort of orangish light, the bluish light. Now, you generally want to support one of those lights in a sort of rim light. So I'm going to support the orange light. Okay, let me support the orange light. So I see this orange light over here. Let me support it. So I'm going to drop an RS light over here. And this one will be, once again, this is basically an edge light slash rim light. Maybe even a key light. You can maybe argue it's a key light here. So then I'm going to go over here, increase the exposure slightly. And I want to match the color. I know that it's a little bit orangish, something like that, sort of pink color. Increase this a bit and I'll decrease the spread. Right, so now you can sort of get an idea of what this does for the scene, because if we hide this, so switch this off quickly, you can see that light does sort of exist already, but when we add it, right, it adds a lot of contrast, a little bit more depth to this, and acts as a key light or as a rim light, depending on how we want to position it, and that just adds a little bit. And so I think that that's an awesome thing to do. And then this is fine. But another thing that you might want to add is something that sort of interrupts the light. There's a couple of ways of doing this. You can add a texture onto your light, so it sort of acts like geometry sitting in front of it. You often do this with like a gradient. So you'll have a radial gradient sort of from the center out, and that will ensure that the light's almost diffused. It's not such a harsh edge. That's very nice to do. You can download like sets of these things online, and then you would add it. Where do you even add it? Shape mesh? No. Where do you even add it? Oh, use texture, right? You just say use texture, and then you can apply a texture to your light instead. And then you go over to texture, choose the file name, whatnot. So that's cool, right? You can do that. Alternatively, you can add a bit of geometry. So I'm going to drop another geonode over here, and I'll just call this one, I don't know, light block. And so it's going to block light. And I'm going to drop a grid, just position this grid a bit differently. So I'll drop a transform node. Also going to give us some more rows and columns. Actually, less, what do I want? Less rows, more columns. No, more rows, less columns. Yeah. Something like that. Okay, so now I'm going to position this. So I just sort of position it in front of that light over there. Somewhere over here. This should be fine. Now, if we take a look, it'll just block that light. So, you know, nothing really. We're just getting a little bit of leak over there. But that's close to what we want, because now what we can do is just drop a blast node over here. And let's just select some of these. So we'll just select a couple of these to let some light through, a sort of natural block. And then you can do like a subdivide so the edges aren't so harsh, something like that. And let's see what that does. Not much. We'll keep blasting.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang, bang.
Just until we end up with some interesting shape. We don't want it to block too much. So let's see that. So now we're getting something a bit more interesting. So let's go back to our light over here, look through light, and that is our, maybe I should have named these properly, room 1. Right, so let's see. If we want some more of this light on the background, maybe that'll be cool. Right, so now you can get the idea, right? You use this light to add more interest onto the background. And perhaps this is not what you want. You can do an attribute blur if you don't want such sharp edges on this. So just blur and don't pin border points, just until you have something that sort of blocks some light, but still looks natural, right? Like this still looks okay. And then you can do stuff like changing the blast and, right? So now this has so much more interest just coming from the lighting. And this really goes to show that lighting is one of the most important things in your shot. And then you can do all the other stuff like depth of field and whatnot, whatever you want. But this is just to show, you know, lighting is important. And I showed you how to do dramatic lighting and more natural lighting. And if you have no focal point, say you're doing a terrain, right? I'm just going to turn my background into the most basic terrain you've ever seen. So let's just do this. Subdivide, bit of a mountain node. So you've got a scene that's just, it's got a bit of variation to it. I almost crashed Houdini by just dragging my subdivide to like 20. So let's not do that again. Let's do 6 to start. Take a look. Okay, good. Okay, good. Less broken. Very nice. 7. Okay, cool. Increase the element size on this just to make some sort of like fake terrain. And I'm gonna transform this 90 degrees on this side. Oh no, 90. Is that, wait, what am I doing? Is that fine? Where'd it go? Oh, it's up there and upside down. Minus 90 and bring it up a bit. Okay, so cool. We have a very basic terrain now. And let me just remove my light block thing. Okay, so let's position this camera quick. Just somewhere here. I don't know, wherever, right? I just want to show you what lighting can do for a terrain and how you set up this sort of lighting, because this is different to portraiture, obviously. So let's see what we have with our environment and room light active. Okay, so I'm just going to disable those and hide them because I want to show you some other stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to drop a light dome and bring it over here. ENV, take a look at how this looks. It'll be very flat, obviously. Super flat. You don't see anything that's going on. So say you take this and you're like, cool, I want an HDRI. Great. We add an HDRI. We have something like that. Maybe I'll choose a different one. I don't know if I like that. Let's do this. Okay, so this is a nice light, right? It's got a good look to it. And, you know, there's nothing really special about it, but I do see that a lot of people tend to stop at this point for some reason. So, there's a lot more that you can actually do here. And it's important when doing terrains to remember that out in the wild, out in nature, there's only one real light source, and that's the sun. So you need to kind of look at where the light's coming from in your HDRI, because we can see that all of these shadows are being cast on this side, the side facing us, right? So that means that the light source is from there. So we should match that. Alternatively, rotate your HDRI if you're not happy with that. But we know that the light source is sort of here. Doesn't have to be perfect, just sort of over here. Drop a light. So this light over here, we want this to be a supporting light, right? So let's see what that does for us. Okay, so it's sort of supporting the light that we already have here. I can increase the exposure. That's already looking a bit better, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease the spread on this and narrow it. So now it's very intense in that area. Just drop the exposure a bit. Now you can sort of see what I'm getting at, right? You have this very interesting light that sort of draws your eye towards the center over here. So let's look through that light. That is, oh wait, I should name it. I'll just call this supporting light. So, or ENV support, so environment support. And I will look through that light. Now I'm going to change the color of this. So a little bit orangish, more towards the peach side. Something like that looks kind of cool. Now let's add even more interest, right? So now we've got a fairly good setup with our light over there. But to add more interest to this, we can do things like fake clouds. So because the sun is actually high up, it's not actually hitting at this angle really. It is still above the clouds, of course. So that means that you can fake a light from above. So we're going to drop a grid. And let me just put this over here. This one will just move up over here and make it a lot bigger. Oh, whoops, make it a lot bigger. Just like that. Increase rows and columns. And then I'll just use a attribute noise. The attribute noise I'll just make a float. We'll increase the element size on this. Something like this. That's fine. We'll just rename this to cut or something. So it's a cut attribute, and we'll drop a delete node. And all we have to say over here is delete by expression at cut less than 0.5. Okay, maybe that'll work. I'm not sure yet. I'll just decrease the element size a bit, I think. So what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to fake clouds here, right? So some empty spaces. So this might be fine, who knows? Bit of a subdivide, and that should be fine. So now I'm going to drop a light above the light that I had, but this one I want above these clouds. So I've gotten what I want from this light. It's an interesting light that sort of cuts across the terrain. But now I'm going to add one above this over here. And this one, I'll just call it like cloud light or whatever. And over here, we can just increase the exposure. And we want it to match the color of our environment support. So I'll just take this over here and copy parameter, paste relative references in here. Okay, so now let's take a look at that. Right, so we can see what this is doing for us. I'm not exactly happy with how it looks so far, but it's okay. I'll just make a few adjustments to this. So I want more detail. So that means this over here needs a smaller element size. So element size, decrease this maybe to something like this. Okay, subdivide, and I'll do a blur again. Okay, so that's not bad. Then this cloud light, I need to make some minor adjustments to it. Okay, so this is getting a bit better. Let me just drop my light over here. Right, so now you can see the sort of variation that you're getting on this. And from here, you can add a whole bunch of things, right? One thing that might be cool is some volumetrics. So I'm just going to go to out, switch on some volumetrics, and that'll be redshift, volumetrics, enable, and let's just see what I can get with this. So our cloud light, I will increase its contribution scale so that it actually contributes to that sort of volumetric. Right, so with some minor adjustments, this is kind of what you get, where you have these rays of light coming down through the volumetrics. And so this is an interesting touch to add to a very simple terrain like this. And that takes you, maybe 5 minutes to sort of add. And of course you can adjust this, maybe this is a bit hectic or whatever, but it's very simple to just with lighting and a bit of environmental changes, have a very interesting scene. Like, I think this looks a lot more interesting than having it just flat with an HDRI, and this only took a few minutes. So I would suggest doing things like this to really add interest to shots, and this still looks fairly natural. It doesn't look exactly natural. There would be some tweaking that you would have to do, but this does look decent, right? You're getting lots of interesting variation through lighting. And all of these things can still be adjusted, right? You can still increase contrast of that light over there. You can still increase the brightness of your HDRI, all of those things. So, you want a brighter scene, you just do something like that. You don't want it to be sort of early morning or late afternoon. You can make changes to your HDRI, whatever it is, right? There's loads and loads and loads of things you can do from here. So let's just do that one. And change this to a slightly bluer light, right? So hopefully you can sort of see that you can set the mood just with lighting. And this is an important thing to understand because a lot of the time your geometry may be awesome or your dynamics may be awesome. Whatever you have may be pretty much perfect, but it's being let down by simple lighting issues. And so lighting and composition, those are things that you learn as you go. But hopefully this sort of thing helps you out. So you can figure out where to position your lights, what feels natural, what looks good, and these little tricks where you sort of block lights with geometry and things. All of those things are kind of cool to add. So hope to see you add those things. But yeah, that's it for this video. I did want to make shorter videos and catch up on the days that I haven't really done yet, but I thought that this would be cool. So, you know, rather give you quality content than just rush through everything. So I hope this helped you. Let me know what you think about this. If you have any questions or sort of queries or concerns, or I said something dumb or did something dumb, let me know. I'm always interested to hear. So thanks for watching. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.